Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're embarking on a fascinating journey to a place many overlook. A small, arid nation, Djibouti, often seen as remote, but it hides a surprisingly rich and really profoundly strategic history. We've compiled a stack of sources that give us, I think, a truly comprehensive look at its past, present, and even its future.
Exactly. And our mission today is to truly unpack the unique layers of Djibouti. We'll explore everything from its ancient origins, its complex colonial past, right up to its current role as a critical global crossroads. And of course, the significant challenges and remarkable opportunities it faces today. We're here to extract those essential nuggets of knowledge for you so you can quickly grasp why this seemingly inconspicuous corner of the world isn't just fascinating, but actually fundamentally important.
Absolutely, and you'll discover this almost unbelievable story of how a country, literally barely a stone's throw from the world's hottest place, managed to transform itself into a major economic hub, and how its incredibly challenging environment also holds some truly unique natural wonders. This is going to be quite the story. Okay, let's unpack this. So, first impressions, Djibouti. It's a small country, right? We're talking about, 23,000 square kilometers, less than 1 million people, and it's arid. Very little rainfall. For many, it might evoke images of, I don't know, a remote, maybe even an unhealthy outpost.
But that initial picture, it completely masks its undeniable geographic power. I mean, think about it. Djibouti is perfectly situated on the eastern edge of the Horn of Africa, right where the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden converge. And what's truly striking, really defining, is its mere 26-kilometer distance from the oil-rich Arabian Peninsula. That proximity alone tells you so much about its significance historically and today.
And that strategic location has really defined its entire history, hasn't it? It's not a new thing. It has always been a critical crossroads for historic trade routes. The French, for instance, they knew this. They were acutely aware when they started developing the town back in 1888, placing it strategically on that vital new route from the Suez Canal to Asia. They saw the long game.
Oh, definitely. And if you look back even further, the region holds some of the earliest traces of human activity. Archaeological finds nearby, in the Afar region, they suggest an ancient Afro-Arab society with incredibly deep roots. The first distinct settlers we sort of encounter are the Sahara nomads, known for their enduring round huts. You still see that influence. Then, as we move from what sources call an indicative second millennium BC, hinting at early societies, we see these diverse cultures developing. From the first millennium BC up to the 4th century AD, life became more settled. You see semi-domesticated animals, cultivation, even fortified villages built of basalt stones. Then came a really significant shift in the 7th century. Islam arrives, brought by Arab merchants. And that legacy is still profoundly felt today. You know, the enduring reverence for Sheikh Ibrahim's tomb, for example, speaks to that.
Right. So given that deep history and the strategic geography, it's interesting how relatively late Djibouti was formally brought under French rule, 1896. That seems quite late compared to other colonial ventures in Africa. What was France's specific plan here?
That's a great point. France's vision for Djibouti was, well, very precise and quite different from their other colonies. It was never really intended as a settlement colony. Once the port was completed, it was designed purely as a crucial coaling and refueling station. For maritime routes heading to the Far East, it was all about logistics, global power projection, not about populating the land itself.
So in those early colonial days, despite that strategic importance you mentioned, there was actually surprisingly little economic exploitation of the land itself. Sources say for over a decade after occupation, it was essentially an arid, almost waterless wasteland, just a small military garrison.
Exactly. But the French were incredibly efficient in developing the port's infrastructure. That was the focus. They established key settlements like Obak and Tajura. And crucially, they constructed the railway line. This railway wasn't just for transport, it was the absolute lifeline. It supplied materials, labor, everything for the port and the military. France basically built an entire commercial ecosystem around this port. Factories, codfish salting operations, packet boats, huge warehouses. The scale was quite impressive. Within 50 years, France had pretty much monopolized foreign trade. Shipping tonnage skyrocketed, generating, significant annual profits. It fundamentally transformed the local economy around that port.
And that economic transformation must have had a profound social impact, too. The French language, for example, it became official, dominant, especially after World War II, right? That reshaped the whole education system.
Absolutely. And perhaps even more deeply, French rule created this significant detachment from traditional clan-based political systems. Local elders, their influence was sidelined. And if they were deemed inconvenient, they could simply be replaced by the French authorities. There was also this systematic exclusion of local labor from any formal government jobs, plus the introduction of a centralized taxation system. It all combined, really, to forge what the sources call a new hybrid political culture, very different from before.
What about World War II? How did Djibouti fit into that global conflict?
Well, its experience during the war also speaks volumes about its unique position. Despite being technically an occupied country, it notably remained loyal to France. But this loyalty came at a terrible cost, a heavy tribute in human lives. Thousands of Termeligs, these auxiliary men, were recruited, sometimes forced, into the war effort. Economically, things ground to a halt. Transportation, trains, even camels stopped for the war effort. The French also built massive concrete bunkers preparing for a potential Italian invasion. Ironically, this provided much-needed work. Djiboutians worked at quarries, earning money to buy Cadi's basic necessities during incredibly hard times. And things like General Wavel's Campagne de l'Éthiopie, the Ethiopian campaign, and the anti-fascist newspaper L'Homme Libre also really influenced local thinking during that period.
Okay, so after World War II, a new chapter, the spirit of anti-colonialism starts sweeping the globe. And that fuels a national awakening in Djibouti too, right? So what did that push for self-determination actually look like there?
It was definitely a growing desire for independence. You could feel it. Nourished, absolutely, by that broader anti-colonial sentiment, but also by the very real unfair discrimination people had suffered under French rule. The French foothold, as one source puts it, was truly shaken by the national awakening of the minorities within the territory.
And internally, this led to some really fascinating political developments. Nationalist parties started to form, like the Demo Independent Party in 1946, mostly French-educated, wealthy Afar merchants, I read.
That's right. And then you had the Progressive Democratic Party, the PDP, also in 46. They directly questioned French sovereignty. They wanted French Somaliland returned.
Which then led to a split, and in 1952, the Democratic Union of Djibouti, the UDT, was created. And this party seems to have become more distinctly Djiboutian, really aiming for independence itself.
Yes, but what's truly intriguing here, and quite complex, is the political tightrope these parties were walking. While they were definitely anti-colonial, paradoxically, many believed they'd actually be safer under a continued French mandate. Safer than under, say, a UN protectorate or joining a federation with newly independent Somali states. There's a lot of uncertainty. So this ironic dynamic, it inadvertently helped create a new Djiboutian identity, an identity that, strangely enough, drew on some of the very symbols France itself had used to bring order. It's a complicated legacy.
So all this political activity, these emerging parties, it all seemed to build towards 1977 and a referendum on a revised constitution. Was this a moment of genuine national unity, or was it, well, more complicated than that?
Oh, definitely complicated, very complex. President Gele, he framed this referendum as a step towards unity, but really, it triggered a constitutional crisis. It seems he was looking to solidify his own dominance, and frankly, France encouraged him. Djibouti's strategic location was still incredibly valuable for Western naval presence, you see.
But the opposition didn't just accept this.
No, not at all. Elements within the opposition quickly united. They formed these opposition clubs. They called for a public campaign, mass mobilization, and ultimately, a full boycott of the vote.
And compared to earlier political events we talked about, the protests that followed were described as violent. Clashing broke out.
Exactly. A stark contrast. Despite Gele's appeals for unity, the violence escalated quickly. That, combined with the widespread disenfranchisement from the boycott, really undermined the legitimacy of the vote, both locally and in the eyes of international observers. This period, it really foreshadowed the deep internal complexities, the fault lines, that would continue to shape Djibouti's politics long after independence.
So after this complex path, what did independence actually mean on the ground? What were the immediate realities, the challenges post-1977?
Well, the immediate period after 77 was marked by truly significant challenges, huge challenges. Those rivalries between the main ethnic groups, the Somali and the Afar, they weren't resolved. They were actually severely exacerbated. This led to assassinations and eventually, tragically, a brutal 3-decade-long civil war. What started as a somewhat marginalized Afar liberation movement unfortunately transformed into a conflict that fractured both the state and the nation. At its heart, you had these deep-seated clan grievances, discriminatory policies, arguments over economic domination, and just a profound sense of betrayal felt by many, particularly the Afar. The consequence was devastating. Djibouti at one point became ranked as the world's poorest country. Think about that. 30% of its people below the poverty line.
And economically, things sounded just as dire. these socialist programs, they didn't work out.
No, they were poorly conceived and falsely advertised, according to our sources. They largely failed to boost agriculture or industry, the key sectors you'd hope for. Then you had droughts, diseases hitting crucial livestock exports. That was a major blow. Plus, the country faced this immense strain from refugee influx, mainly from the civil war in Somalia. That put huge pressure on the national budget and led to many Djiboutians actually leaving the country themselves, seeking better opportunities. Even the structural adjustment programs brought in around 1988, which were supposed to help, well, they notably did not lead to economic development.
Yet despite all that grim history, somehow Djibouti managed to turn around. You mentioned significant economic growth recently.
Yes, it's quite remarkable. The strategic renaissance, you could call it. Signs of recovery started appearing in the early 2000s. GDP growth hit 4% by 2003. Fast forward, and over the past decade, Djibouti has genuinely been one of the fastest-growing countries in the world. We're talking average annual GDP growth over 5%. And in 2018, it actually had the highest growth rate in Africa.
Wow, what drove that?
The key insight, really, is how targeted large-scale investment in its port infrastructure has fundamentally transformed the nation. Djibouti leveraged its one singular, undeniable geographic advantage, its position as a global maritime choke point. They turned that into a booming economic engine, literally turning, this barren landscape into a beacon for international commerce. Look at the DPFCA, the Ports and Free Zones Authority. By late 2018, it reported 7.5 billion Djibouti francs in profit. That's something like 17% of the entire national tax revenue.
Level numbers.
And driven by massive projects. The $600 million Dorele container terminal, the $350 million Dorele multipurpose port, huge Chinese investments too, like a $2.3 billion waterway project. All this investment has had knock-on effects too, boosting urbanization, lifting living standards, improving public health indicators. It's a real shift.
So that's where it gets really interesting, connecting that economic success directly to its unique global position. Let's dig into that.
Absolutely. Look, Djibouti sits slightly astride the equator, right? But critically, it commands the Straits of Bab el-Mandeb. This narrow strait is a secure link between Europe and Asia. It influences maritime trade worth roughly $500 billion annually. It's indispensable for global shipping.
And like you said earlier, this isn't just a modern thing. It's historically been a crossroads. Europe, Asia, Africa, the ancient incense road passed through or near here. And its importance for the Muslim world, too, being relatively close, only about 1,000 kilometers from Mecca and Al-Madinah. It's always been a convergence point.
Precisely. And its modern prominence is just increasing. You've got the newly opened oil and gas export pipeline from landlocked Ethiopia. It's a huge development. There's also an imminent undersea telecommunication link coming online, connecting directly to Europe, plus active petroleum and gas exploration happening in its territorial waters. Djibouti isn't just a port anymore. It's becoming this vital ocean outlet for hinterland countries, constantly expanding, modernizing, handling more and more cargo, especially container freight.
And the government has been incredibly proactive in attracting the foreign investment needed for all this, right? Over 20 agreements with major global businesses from France, Saudi Arabia, UAE, China, Singapore, Japan. That's a diverse portfolio.
It is, and the projections are ambitious. A potential $3.94 billion rise in investments by 2035. That could create maybe 126,000 new jobs. That's significant for a small population.
And they set up that investment promotion agency in 2017 to ensure transparency, make it easier to do business.
Yes, and interestingly, that includes a requirement for foreign firms to actually include locals in their capital shareholding, up to 30%. That's quite a statement about ensuring local benefit.
A bold move, yeah. And this proactive stance must also shape its international relations, which sound quite nuanced.
They are. Take France, for example. For them, Djibouti was its last colonial possession. That history inevitably leads to complex political negotiations even after independence. France also presses Djibouti on human rights issues, concerns about torture, arbitrary detention. Djibouti has to balance that with its growing military and economic ties to the Gulf region, which are also crucial. And then there's the U.S. angle. Given its strategic position, depending on what's happening regionally, Djibouti could provide vital logistical and infrastructure support to American missions. It's a constant balancing act.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Let's dive into the heart of Djibouti itself, beyond the ports and politics. Let's talk about the people, the culture.
Right. Djibouti's cultural heritage is incredibly vibrant and is profoundly shaped by its ethnic diversity. Primarily, you have the Somali, making up about 60% of the population, and the Afar, around 35%. But there are also smaller yet significant populations of Arabs, French, Ethiopians, and increasingly Chinese workers involved in the big infrastructure projects.
And this creates quite an intricate social fabric, I imagine. Somali society, traditionally clan-based with its own complex rivalries, and the semi-nomadic Afar, often struggling for grazing rights, especially as the environment changes.
Exactly. Traditional livelihoods like cattle herding for Somalis and goats for the FR, they're still vital. Though yes, modern commerce and the pull of the ports have definitely led to more people moving into towns and cities.
And the languages reflect this mix. Arabic, Somali, French are all official.
Correct. And indigenous Afar is also widely spoken. What's noteworthy is that French is still taught as the first language in schools. That colonial influence remains strong in education.
What about traditional practices? Are they still a big part of daily life?
Yes, very much so. There's often a clear division of labor, you see. Men typically handle camel herding, fishing, women manage the homestead, raise the children. Yet heavy communal labor, like building houses, that's often done by both sexes together. There's a strong community spirit and some deep-seated customs like specific homestead restrictions for women who are expectant or menstruating. Those are still observed and respected by many.
And the arts. I read about very rich oral traditions.
Oh, absolutely. Oral poetry is huge. Forms like gabe and buranbur are still vibrant. They're used to recount complex clan histories, express social commentary, even tackle political issues. It's a living tradition. Traditional music and dance, too. Kabul music has these really distinctive rhythms. And Danto panegyric dancing is still very popular at gatherings. You'll still hear traditional instruments like the lyre, the drum, and the fardul. That's a kind of cage drum women often play. And of course, religious celebrations are central. Ramadan, Eid al-Adha, they're observed with great community feeling and fervor.
And National Day, June 27th, celebrating independence. That sounds like a big event.
It is a very vibrant spectacle. Colorful parades, martial arts displays. It really brings the whole country together to celebrate that hard-won independence.
Are there other major cultural festivals?
Yes, there are others, like celebrations focused on racial equality. These often highlight the unique traditions of each ethnic group. You'll see specific dances, songs, traditional clothing from Afar, Somali, Arab communities. It really showcases Djibouti's pluralistic social fabric and this commitment to unity and diversity.
Okay, so looking forward now. What's fascinating is how much untapped potential this small nation seems to hold, especially in tourism, but alongside some really serious environmental and social hurdles.
That's a perfect summary. The tourism potential is immense. Djibouti has these truly unique geographical and cultural features. You get this incredible blend of arid, semi-arid, volcanic landscapes right next to white sandy beaches and protected marine reserves. Think about Lake Ebeye, with its almost Martian landscape of limestone chimneys and geysers. Or Lake Assal, one of the lowest, saltiest places on Earth, incredibly rich in minerals. These are world-class natural wonders.
And the Day Forest National Park, the cloud forest.
Exactly, a rare cloud forest in that region, home to endemic species like the Djibouti francolin. It makes it a really unique spot for ecotourism. Plus, you have great scuba diving, hiking, kite surfing. The government sees this potential. They're actively working to boost tourism, developing infrastructure, marketing the country, and importantly, ensuring tourist safety.
But balancing that potential with the environmental challenges must be incredibly difficult. Djibouti seems highly vulnerable to climate change. Rising temperatures, droughts affecting almost all its territory, accelerating desertification.
It's a huge concern. These impacts directly threaten traditional pastoralist livelihoods. They lead to significant livestock losses. There's even worry it could affect Lake Epeye's water supply, which would be catastrophic. And add to that, growing concerns about pollution. Even intercontinental sea pollution affecting its coastal waters, apparently increasing since around 2000.
And the economic risk is substantial, too. Losses could be up to $90 million a year by 2050.
That's the projection, yes. The economic cost of inaction is potentially massive.
So what are they doing on the conservation front? You mentioned Day Forest.
Right. Establishing Day Forest National Park back in 2005 was a key step. And there are plans for more national reserves and protected areas. Yeah. But it's challenging, balancing conservation with people's need for access to resources in a tough environment.
And finally, what about the social side? Education and healthcare. It sounds like a mixed picture there, too.
It is. Education is free and compulsory for 15 years, which is good. And the literacy rate is decent, 71%, and apparently rising. But there are persistent problems. School dropouts, especially among girls, remain a concern. And there's a shortage of qualified teachers.
And healthcare.
Healthcare also faces significant hurdles. Maternal mortality rates are high. Diseases like tuberculosis are prevalent. Djibouti apparently accounts for 17% of all cases in the region. AIDS is also a serious issue, affecting about 2.1% of the population. And underlining all this is a critical shortage of medical doctors, only about 14 per 100,000 people. That's very low.
So we've really traced Djibouti's incredible journey today, from those ancient trade routes drawing people to the Red Sea, through the long shadow of French colonialism, the turmoil of civil conflict, and now we see this nation, almost against the odds, rewriting its story as a rapidly growing, internationally significant hub, leveraging that amazing geography.
It really is a testament to the resilience of its people, and this unique blend of deep-rooted tradition trying to navigate and shape the forces of modernity and globalization. It's quite something.
Indeed. So maybe we'll leave you with this thought to consider. Djibouti, a country where ancient traditions meet a high-stakes, globalized economy right at one of the world's most vital crossroads. How will its deeply rooted cultural heritage and its formidable, perhaps even challenging, strategic position shape its path forward, especially through the complex environmental and geopolitical tests of the coming decades? How will it continue to carve out its unique place in the world?